I'm Ann Collins Goodyear, and together with my husband and co-director, Frank Goodyear, it is with tremendous pleasure that we welcome you to the keynote program for At First Light, 2 Centuries of Artists in Maine. Originally intended to open 2 years ago in the summer of 2020, the timing of the exhibition, as you know, was upended by COVID. Indeed, on March 15th, 2020, the anniversary of Maine statehood, its bicentennial anniversary, Governor Janet Mills was signing her emergency declaration to help provide necessary resources to Mainers to grapple with the pandemic. The past 2 years have been momentous ones for the world, the United States, and for Maine, and we are keenly aware that the exhibition has been abundantly enriched by the conversations, debates, and growth that have occurred during this period. We are also keenly aware of the ongoing resilience of Mainers and of the Native communities who have occupied this region for thousands of years, long before the arrival of European colonizers, and long before Maine statehood was conceived, let alone realized. With this in mind, we wish to affirm that we are located on the beautiful homelands of Wabanaki people and their ancestors. In recognition, we acknowledge their enduring spiritual relationships to these lands and surrounding waterways, and we commit to celebrating and understanding the vibrancy and diversity of Native American cultures. In developing our exhibition, a project undertaken with the generous support of many colleagues, in particular Michael Kolmanecki, Chief Curator at the Farnsworth Museum, and photographer Walter Smalling, with whom we collaborated on the companion book for this exhibition, At First Light, 2 Centuries of Maine Artists, Their Homes and Studios. Frank and I recognized the fascinating tensions that exist between the reality of life in this part of the world and idealized visions of it. The show, therefore, includes both the vision of noted artists developed elsewhere and brought here, as well as those of individuals who have lived here and used native materials or absorbed the harvesting and exploitation of natural resources for interests that extend well beyond Maine. At the same time, the exhibition explores the multiple generations of artists who have found encouragement in this region, often because they found a place that they could both work undisturbed and enjoy the companionship of fellow artists whose forward-looking work provided fodder for further creative inspiration. In this vein, we have enjoyed gathering together the work of artists active in such artist colonies as those in Ogunquit, Georgetown, and Monhegan. But perhaps no creative community has proved more influential for the region than that of the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture. Established in 1946, the school recently celebrated its 75th anniversary. Formed in the period immediately following World War II, Skowhegan has gone on to have an outsized impact on the development of contemporary art in Maine and indeed around the world. Indeed, it is noteworthy that the great majority of artists presented in this exhibition, active in the second half of the 20th century and in the current century, have had a meaningful connection with the school. Many, such as Ashley Bryan, David Driscoll, Robert Indiana, and Alex Katz, formed a lasting relationship with Maine after spending a summer working there. In researching the exhibition, it was striking and inspiring to realize what a powerful presence the school has proved in nurturing generations of path-breaking visionary individuals. We are therefore delighted that Sarah Workna and Faye Hirsch are with us today to discuss its development, its current work, and to point forward to the vision it now nurtures for the future.
To realize an exhibition such as this, we have been so fortunate to have the support of many individuals, private collectors who lent works, museums who lent works, and a number of financial supporters. And I just want to list some of the people who are our important donors. Our lead sponsor, the Rue Institute. Our media partner, Down East and Maine Homes. The Maine Bicentennial Commission, the Elizabeth Hamlin Fund, Peter Grua and Mary O'Connell, both class of '76, Robert Frison, the Devonwood Foundation, Hallie Harrisburg, class of 1990, and her husband Michael Rosenfeld, John and Paula Hornbossel, parents of a student in the class of 2025, Selena Little, the Libra Foundation, the Morton Kelly Charitable Trust, Steve Merrow, class of 1984, and his wife Diane Pappas, both parents a member of the class of 2021, Eric Silverman, class of 1985, and his wife Svetlana, both parents of a member of the class of 2019, Lindsay Stavros, class of 1995, and her husband Peter Stavros, Patricia Brown, and finally the Roy Hunt Foundation. We thank these individuals tremendously. And now a very quick word about our two distinguished presenters this afternoon. Sarah Werknow is the co-director of the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture, a position she has held since 2010. In this capacity, she directs the organization's core educational program and works with alumni to produce programming outside of the school's summer session. Sarah has lectured widely as a visiting artist, critic at schools and programs around the United States, and has served as an advisor to both academic and residency programs, particularly around issues of equity. As a writer, she was the first guest editor of Art Papers magazine and has been a contributing writer to Pastelogram, Kaleidoscope, and others. Her most recent publications include an essay on participatory education and one on radical education, both published by the New Museum. She serves on the boards of the Colby College Museum of Art and the Black Lunch Table, and is a member of the Lake Wesserunsick Conservation Committee here in Maine. Faye Hirsch is visiting associate professor of art and design at Purchase College at the State University of New York, where she has taught since 2012, and now coordinates the MFA program. An editor and critic who has published widely on contemporary art, Faye is editor-at-large at Art in America, where she has been a senior editor since 2003. She previously served as editor-in-chief at Art on Paper and senior editor at Print Collectors Newsletter. In addition to her work at SUNY Purchase, Faye has taught at the University of Oregon, the University of Arizona, and the Rhode Island School of Design. She is now completing a book about Skowhegan's history with Ingrid Schaffner, which is due out in the next year or two. Please join us in welcoming Sarah Werknow and Faye Hirsch.
Thank you, Anne and Frank, for hosting us. I'm Sarah Werknow.
I'm Faye Hirsch.
So we'll just get started. For the better part of the last decade, my co-director Katie Sonnenborn and I had the goal of publishing the first book on Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture's history. The groundwork of organizing the school's archives had begun early in my time with the organization. My previous co-director, Kate Haw, who went on to run the Smithsonian Archives of American Art, she started the archiving process, clearly. One of the first things I did in working there was to haul boxes and boxes of papers and photos and whatever else from a dirt basement in one of the dorms on campus back to New York, so we might begin seeing what remained from the previous 60 plus years of the school's existence. We knew there were boxes, but we didn't know what they contained. We knew aspects of the history. We certainly knew some amount of mythology. We've been lucky to have a consistent group of board members and family members surrounding us with long and rich memories. But of course, memories are generated by the individuals who relay them. Over time, we found previous starts of books, oral histories, materials collated but abandoned, and when we began a more serious exploration of what it might take to begin to make a narrative of Skowhegan, we realized quickly why previous attempts had gone unfinished. It is a story of American art, a story of Maine, landscape, every major political and social moment of the 20th century, told by thousands of individuals who each remember their experiences from their own singular perspective over time. And so the question became, how do you tell a story if the main characters are constantly changing in a place that very few people can actually see? It's no wonder the task felt too enormous to be encapsulated in a single narrative. But still, we pushed on, figuring we might just start somewhere. And we knew key to this somewhere was finding the right people to care for however the story might unfold. The school itself is almost like the longest artwork in existence. It's a setting, it is time-based, it's immersive and comprehensive green telescopes between representation and abstraction. It's a conceptual project, social practice. Its 100+ buildings are sculptures that relate constantly to one's body, and it's a container of history, of site, of economics, of this particular location in central rural Maine. We needed to find authors willing to take on the enormity of the research, detectives who could see the trees for the proverbial forest and the forest for the trees, but who could do so with a close understanding of how artists work, not just in the studio, but in the capacious way in which they approach seeing and participating in the world. We were introduced through our vast network of artists to two individuals, Faye Hirsch, who is with me here now, and Ingrid Schaffner, who together had worn the hats of not only writer, but also educator, curator, archivist, and editor, intersecting in myriad ways with artists and creative practice. It seemed each of them would bring their own approach to the information yet to be uncovered, and with that, unearth a multitude of truths about this place and this experience. When Anne and Frank invited me to speak here today about Maine and about the school, I could have written a speech encapsulating all that I know from my lived experience of running the school on the ground, in that place, with artists and all of their individuality, and all that we've learned through the process of research and digging through papers and meeting alumni. But talking at you isn't really Skowhegan either. We have hundreds and hundreds of lectures in our archives, but the school, as part of its existence as an artwork, is always discursive, a call and response, a telescoping in and out of history and present, an argument, a peacemaking, a site-specific, ever-evolving installation, a living, breathing organism where its longevity is reliant on its dynamism. So I thought to invite Faye, who has just completed the draft of her last chapter and who has fully embraced the wild complexity of the founding years, the crucial role of Maine in the school's past, present, and future, and as many individuals closely related and incidental that she could portray with depth, humanity, creativity, and fullness as one can jam into the retelling of the why and how we came to be. Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture was founded in 1946 by 4 core individuals, all artists: Willard Cummings, Henry Varnum Poor, Sidney Simon, and Charles Cutler. Though as Faye will tell you, even that fact obscures the critical and foundational importance of many other artists who would shape the school in its earliest moments and whose hands, spirits, and priorities are still visible and engaged with today. Fundamental to the school's functioning in 1946 and consistent throughout its 75 years is that the school is a school for artists by artists. The school is governed by 2 complementary and occasionally through history collaborative boards, one who oversees the critical fiduciary and legal operations, and the other, a board of artists who ensure the integrity and evolution of the program. Together, they work to protect, preserve, and innovate on site to respond to the ever-evolving needs of the artists who join us on campus each summer from around the world for 9 weeks. We retain our historic name, the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture, even though we're actually located in the town of Madison. And even as art practice has expanded to now include photo, performance, video, movement, and research and conceptual practices. The school has challenged its own understanding of its history, and while we hold close to it, the founding vision left space for the school to stay on the vanguard in the practices supported there, outside of the boundaries of evaluation, precedent, and trends. I always tell the participants on campus that total openness can be intimidating, and the fear of being totally untethered can actually keep us from engaging with what we don't know or understand, rather than offering the safety to try the unknown. So while the work we support is open-ended, certain aspects of the program have remained consistent and exist as the lightest frame possible to hold, but not to restrict, to offer example, but not to become concretized in its own and therefore our own existence. We serve emerging artists, but that definition is wide. Almost from the beginning, we've had 65 participants, though this summer we only have 54. And 5 resident faculty who live with us for the duration of the 9 weeks to serve as mentors, though what faculty means and what their role is always evolving and innovating. We have 6 visiting faculty who interrupt the consistency of what we do on a daily basis so that we don't do by rote, but by engagement and exposure. We live and work together 24 hours a day for 9 weeks because without interruption, our minds, our conversations, and our ways of making can wander into new territory. Maine is our home. Skowhegan, the school, this location, this environment has meant different things at different times, but even in its simple appearance of almost 350 acres of woods, meadow, and lake, it has always offered a complex meaning and a different depth in our fields of vision that inevitably change how we encounter the world around us. Green is green, but within green, there are untold variations if you begin to look closely. I'm going to stop here as we have a lot to talk about, but I wanted to offer here too this light frame. Faye is going to lead us through the founding moments, the why here and the how here, and then we will spend a little time talking through how a vision crafted in 1946 has stayed so relevant over so much time to so many different people with so many different ideas from so many different places in need of so many different things. Again, it's the constant call and response between history and present and history. As I say over and over when we are in session, Skowhegan is the school, and we are here to learn, and we are here to learn together. So thank you all for being with us to engage in the first of this kind of conversation for Faye and I, and for what we might learn together. Thank you for the incredible community of thinkers, makers, and supporters of creative practice. And many thanks, of course, for this gorgeous and special home that is Maine.
So I don't even know where to begin with. There's so much information that I have been sifting through over the last 3 years. The boxes and boxes that Sarah talks about were put into a certain degree of order at the Skowhegan Archives, and the book that we've crafted is it's a two-sided thing. You know, I was hired to write the narrative of the school and the historical narrative. I'm trained as an art historian, and my background is very much archival. And Ingrid, in a way, has been kind of channeling voices of many, many people to kind of bring it alive in the present, which I think is appropriate for reasons that Sarah just went into. The historical narrative is a fascinating one. I think it's an extremely important one, and it's one that hasn't been told.
And it hinges on so many different facets of the world in the 1940s and 1950s that it becomes a kind of little microcosm of a story that is so much bigger than Skowhegan alone. The school was founded, and I won't go through into great a depth about it, but it was founded by, as she said, these 4 men, technically speaking. I could argue a little bit with leaving that as a solid narrative, but certainly Henry Varnum Poor, Bill Cummings, Willard Cummings, and Sidney Simon were sort of the core founders. And of those, the one that I'd like to just focus on a bit tonight is Willard Cummings, because Willard Cummings was a Mainer. He was born in Maine. He was born in Old Town in 1915. He was raised in Maine. And it was he who, in a way, really held the threads together to put this school in motion and to keep it thriving through many very, very hard times, lots of economic challenges. And he was the main guy. And Cummings was an amazing person, kind of modest, eloquent. I've listened to him speak. He spoke really beautifully. He was extremely sophisticated, but at the same time, very worldly. He knew a lot about the art world. He knew a lot about wealthy people. He was comfortable in those worlds, but he also had a very, very strong tie to the people around him in Skowhegan, the carpenters, the people who did the grounds, the woman who cooked the food. These were all Mainers, and he was extremely close to them, very respectful of their labor. And it is really those people in some ways who shaped what Skowhegan became. A very specific Maine institution with this incredible reach beyond to the New York art world, to the international art world. And it was really kind of an extraordinary sort of back and forth that Cummings was able to accomplish. He was, like I say, he was born in Old Town. He grew up in Skowhegan. He wound up going to Europe in the 20s. He came back, and during the Depression, there was the huge crash. His father was an extremely wealthy textile mills owner in Skowhegan, Guilford, and Old Town. And he had to come back because they didn't go bust. They remained pretty solvent. But he came back, and they bought a farm in Madison, Maine. And they opened this farm, this chicken farm. And his mother, who was kind of an amazing person, really this extreme, again, a very sophisticated, cultured person, but also was really into running this chicken farm. Fixing the house up, which later came to be called Red Farm and is the core of the Skowhegan campus. And they owned a lot of property around there, and that is what formed the basis for the school later on. So it was Cummings who was really the main connection. There was also Henry Varnum Poor, who at that point was a fairly well-established artist. He was a generation older than Cummings. And Sidney Simon. These are 3 people who became friends during the war. They were all in the service. Now, Cummings and Sidney Simon were actual soldiers. Poor was actually a veteran of the First World War. Like I say, he was older than the others. But they happened to get together into something called the War Art Unit, which is a whole history in itself. And these were people who were going to go out and record the Second World War and drawings, and not in photographs, but in drawings and paintings and sketches and everything. And it lasted for about a year before Congress stepped in and just shut it down because they were just a little too wild for their taste. But while they were in the Army, these 3 men actually started talking about what would it be like to have a school, an ideal school in America. What would it be like? And that's a whole fascinating story in itself. But in the end, it was Cummings who they had this sort of drunken night before they were shipped out to Alaska and to the South Pacific, and they thought about the school and everything, and then everybody forgot about it, except for Cummings. Cummings kept that alive. And he fantasized, he must have been very homesick during the war, and he thought about it a lot. And he wrote to his wife about it, and he really, really yearned for Maine. And when he got back, he was the one who put it in motion, figured it out. His parents gave him the farm. The farm was no longer a working farm because there was not enough labor during the war to keep it going. And they gave him the land, and he proceeded to, get particularly Henry Varnum Poor, who was the more prestigious guy, to agree to be the kind of lead teacher there. And Sidney Simon, who had had an extremely traumatic time during the war, he was the most damaged in a way of the three of them by his service. And they came back and they opened the school. And I'm running over a lot of things very quickly, but they did open this school. And they on a shoestring budget, they put this thing together. And the idea was, let's have a place where artists can come and have 9 weeks of uninterrupted time to do their art with each other and with this faculty, that was the core faculty, and with visiting people that they would bring in to make sure that there would be a constantly shifting kind of set of viewpoints that the artists could tap into, these students. And the idea was they wanted very serious students. They didn't want hobbyists. And they were very cognizant of the fact that their location in central Maine was not one of the lovelier parts of Maine. It wasn't the coast with its, as they put it, hideous rocks. They didn't want people coming and just being, beach painters. They wanted people who were going to come and really, really dig in and think about what it meant to be an artist. In the beginning, for the first 10 years or so, a lot of those people were veterans. And one imagines that Skowhegan was a tremendous refuge for them. And it was. They talk about this. There are plenty of accounts of how Ashley Bryan, for example, who is in, and I tried to choose photographs of some of the people who were in Skowhegan for a long time, some of those early pictures that you see. Ashley Bryan was a veteran. He was there and really decompressing from having been in, actually at D-Day. He was in one of the Negro battalions that cleaned up the beach of bodies. He was extremely traumatized by what he had gone through. And it really was a kind of refuge, and it was a place where they could just go and make art for those 9 weeks. So for the first 10 years or so, that was a big part of it. And then there's a whole long changing and everything else. But the one thing I do want to say about it, sort of in line with Frank's introduction of sort of the people who were here, Skowhegan itself, so as Sarah said, Skowhegan is in Madison, it's not in Skowhegan. They chose the name Skowhegan for a couple of reasons. One of which was they didn't want it to be the Madison School of Art because of Madison Avenue. They were going to get a lot of New York artists. They didn't want that association. Skowhegan was such a fancier, kind of cool name that they could use, right? But in fact, what's odd about this is that Skowhegan is an Abenaki word for a place to look out from. It gives me the chills even to say that, honestly, because in the beginning, and I think in many ways still, the idea of looking at the world was extremely important. To Henry Varnum Poor, the idea of observing the world, of recording it, of having this place where you were doing plein air painting, and Alex Katz talks about this. He was there in '49. He came and he, for the first time, did plein air painting under Henry Varnum Poor. He was always grateful to Poor for that. And the idea that you're actually looking at the world in this way was something that was absolutely essential to them. It is just coincidence. It's fortuitous. It's not like that was intended. And yet, the idea of observation was extremely important at Skowhegan for really for decades. And I think in a funny way, we could talk more about this, I think, is how sort of Henry Varnum Poor's idea of reality and of observation it kind of is still there in a way, and sort of how artists now interact with the environment, not as painters and sculptors necessarily, although there is that as well, not necessarily as observational artists as they were in the beginning, but in the landscape. And you can see in the images that Sarah chose, which show people in holes and people out in the water and on the lake and everything else, you know, observing that place. And it is a very special place. That campus is extraordinary, 350 acres. It's really almost what it was in the beginning. They expanded it somewhat, they consolidated it into sort of two parts, the upper and lower campus. The lower campus is on the lake. And it really has stayed the same in many ways from the very start. And even though there were moments where they were thinking about expanding into different parts of the country. There was Puerto Rico was bandied about for a while. The Southwest was bandied about, and it always came back to Maine. Maine was the heart and soul of Skowhegan, and it still is. And it certainly for Bill Cummings, it was absolutely what drove him to make this very magical place. That's a big lot of stuff, and I know that there's so many more details I could go into. I've been piecing this history together literally from bits and pieces, from oral histories, from meetings, minutes from meetings. I've had to go really far afield into sort of the larger world of a time that's so forgotten, the period before the war when Cummings came of age. And then even after the war, the fact that these artists were not the abstract expressionists. They were people who had come out of the WPA, and it's a different kind of history, and one that I think is extremely under-examined in the history of American art. So anyway, I'll stop talking, and we can get into some things together. But that's just sort of a quick rundown of this amazing history that is. I've just been. Thank you, Sarah and Katie. I have loved every second of this research. I haven't for a moment thought, oh God, what a bummer. You know, I just, any time I had to work on this project has been so enriching and so pleasurable. Yeah, wonderful.
So when we were planning this, we talked a little about some of the consistent threads throughout Skowhegan's history, even as the school has changed and the art world has changed and the students have changed. But there seems to be kind of embedded in the DNA and also kind of embedded in the process of the structure of the school, certain things that aren't written down on paper. And Faye had mentioned just a few minutes ago this idea of Skowhegan, the school, serving as a refuge, particularly in the post-war time period for people that were in attendance on the GI Bill and people that were coming from active combat. And that idea of Maine as refuge and Maine as shelter has been something that has taken many different iterations for pretty much every generation of artists who have been there since 1946, whether in times of active combat and war or even today. And so I thought we would just spend a little bit of time talking about some of the kind of major events of the 20th century and how this particular campus that is so removed from the world, how it both functions as an extraction, but also as a kind of sense, a safety space for lots of the artists that have been there. Maybe we can spend a little time talking about Bill Cummings also.
I mean, there could be a whole book about this very subject, I think. There really could be. Yeah, and you know, if you think about the era, in the different traumas that the country was going through. I mean, I know it's an overused word, but you know, today I'm feeling very traumatized by our world, so it seems really appropriate. But the war, right?
Yeah.
In the 50s, there was the issue of McCarthyism. Ben Shahn, who was very active at Skowhegan, and Jack Levine, were both brought up before the House Un-American Activities Committee. And yet, my understanding of Skowhegan from everything that I'm reading is that it was a kind of resolutely apolitical, at least overtly, resolutely apolitical place. And in fact, people kind of fled to it to get away. And I'm thinking in particular of Mary Lovelace O'Neill, an artist who was extremely involved in the civil rights movement in the early 60s, and she wound up coming during the time when she was supposed to be organizing the March on Washington in '63, and she, as she said, she had to pray on it because, but she needed a break. It was so intense, and she was so exhausted, and she came up and she was able to just do art for a summer and not think about it, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think Faye and I have talked about this before, that even in the overtly apolitical, it's also the founders and everyone that's been involved subsequently has made very concrete decisions about who is included at Skowhegan and what it can do for each individual within that inclusion. And that is already a very political position, right? So Mary Lovelace O'Neill was there in '63, right? And she was one of the many students that came through the school's early connection with Howard University, which, you know, having an integrated art school in Maine from 1946, including Ashley Bryan and later David Driscoll and many other artists of color that were in Maine. David Driscoll had said more than one time that, you know, when he was living in Washington, one of the only places where he could eat lunch that was publicly integrated was the National Gallery of Art. And so being able to go to a place like Skowhegan, both as refuge and as kind of freedom, was something that has kind of reverberated over time. It's been a place that actively sought out some degree of both anonymity away, right? We're on that campus, so no one is watching how integration, whatever groups are integrating there, is happening. So that it alone allows for a specific kind of freedom, but also for those that need relief from a larger kind of body paranoia that exists out in the world. It's been a very important space, and that has included, you know, lots of artists who identify as LGBTQIA the terms that we use now, which weren't the terms that were used in the 40s, but that was another really important group of artists that were taken care of, you know, given voice, not policed in that space. That was really important.
Yeah, I mean, it is complicated. First of all, to talk about integration. So we can't really say that there was a huge involvement of, for example, Black students at Skowhegan until the 80s. But there were people every year, and Cummings. Multiple people every year. And Cummings was quite amazing in this regard. He was actually, during the war, he taught Black art students he was at Fort Belvoir, and he had a mural program there. And he was asked by one of the commanders of one of the colored battalions to allow some Black students to take classes. And they came in, they took classes from him, and he was totally blown away by these students. And he wrote a report after the war about how excellent they were and how they were not allowed to exhibit with the other students, much to his chagrin. And that he also was invited to Howard. While he was teaching these students, he was invited to Howard, because some of them had been going to school at Howard. And he went and he met the faculty there. He may have already known them. I don't know for sure. I haven't been able to figure this out. But he went to Howard, and I really believe it's Cummings who was very much responsible for Howard being looped in as one of the few scholarship colleges. Skowhegan always had a big scholarship program, and they did it in association with schools across the country. It's one of the ways they got the word out, and one of them was Howard. And I just think that's kind of amazing, honestly. And why Cummings in particular, it's really hard to say. why it would have been him. But I have my own feelings about this. He was actually very much a closeted gay man. He was married, and his daughter is still very involved in the school, but really didn't ever come out in any kind of, he was involved, his partner was Hugh Gorley, who was the longtime director of the Colby Museum, and at the time he died in 1975. And it's kind of a heartbreaking story, the whole thing, honestly. But I sort of feel that on some level that Cummings had a kind of a deeper kind of affinity for people who were not accepted by, you know, the hegemonic culture. That he had a feeling for that because he himself was not part of that. He was part of it and he was not part of it. He was part of this wealthy class, privileged class, but he also had this secret life. And he was not alone. Jack Eastman, who was the director for a long time, was gay, married. Roy Leaf, who was the financial director for many, many years, was also, and there are others. Nat Saltonstall, who was an advisor and a patron of the school, may have been Cummings' lover before the war. So there was this kind of secret world. So I think that the fact that he set up this school to be such a protected place, a place where people could go and really be able to do their art and not have to think about anything except that part of it was his own fulfillment of his own sort of creation of this magical world for himself as well. So I don't know for sure. It's not like I have a footnote for that or anything, but.
Yeah, you're getting the inside scoop.
Yeah.
But I think these are, I mean, you know, when I think about like kind of how the school functions now and what I've understood about kind of many of the priorities, but also what you realize when you are living and working with artists, right? Like my house is not, I have my own house, but it's basically 10 feet away from their houses, right? We are all together. And part of the great joy of working with artists is figuring out kind of the individualized care that each of them kind of require in terms of thinking about where their practice is when they arrive and what their kind of hope for where they want to go is. And so part of that is inherited within the structure of the school in the robust scholarship program, but in that everybody gets their own studio. There are all of these resources. There are all of these opportunities to learn. Pardon me. And part of that, I think, is really from this kind of vision of like how are you seen as a person in the world, and who gives you the support that you need in order to be kind of the best version of who you want to be. And in my mind, Cummings kind of understood, as you said, both things. He was of a certain financial class and economic background, but he was also someone that maybe had to live part of his life in the shadow, and those two things combined actually make for a space where care and support and trust and visibility and freedom, whether or not you were closeted, whether or not you were a person of color, whether or not you were a woman that was working in the sculpture shop, that all of this was available. You could do whatever you wanted because no one could actually see you.
I mean, Driscoll says, this is the first place I was considered to be an artist, first and foremost,
Yeah.
You know, rather than a Black person.
Yeah.
You know, and that's not to say that there weren't all kinds of issues over the years, and still are, no doubt, but it was kind of an amazing thing. And I wanted to say something else about what Cummings did, is that, to my mind, and I teach and you teach, you know, one of the most important things about being an artist is that you're able to own your own labor. Mm-hmm. That is what gives you freedom. And I really feel that Cummings wanted to make that possible for people. Mm-hmm. The scholarship program was extraordinary. I mean, it was always like 40, 50% at least of the students who came in the beginning, and they had nothing. I mean, they were just scraping pennies up, you know, to try to get money together to be able to do this. But he also would, and you know this because you've inherited this position as director, is that he set it up so that it was the students would never know how hard it was to keep the school going, to keep it running, not just financially, but also even during the summer, keep the grounds nice. You know, Cummings didn't want them. In the beginning, they had the local Maine girls would come and wait on tables. They worked as waitresses in the dining hall. They weren't to clean their own rooms. He didn't want any of that. He wanted them to have an absolutely free, unencumbered time. And it was again and again you hear students saying from those times, and I'm sure later, oh, what it felt like to have that time. For the first time in my life, I really felt what it could be, what it might be to be an artist, you know.
We believe artists have to clean up after themselves in certain times. However, the roots are there, right? I mean, I think one of the things I've always been grateful for as the person that is there on the grounds and running the school as it's in action is the flexibility, right? To really think about what are the core parts of the founding that we can then carry forward, and what are the parts that they were generous enough to kind of leave open to adaptation. The world has changed, right? And artists have changed, and their needs have changed, and also our needs and wants from them has also changed. We definitely still have the same kind of support system for them to be whomever they decide they want to be over the course of those 9 weeks and in the future, but it's been also critical to be transparent about the money and be transparent about what it takes to run that place and be appreciative. And I think as the kind of art students that come to Skowhegan has changed and expanded, that is actually something, A, that they're really aware of and very interested in talking about labor, in talking about work, in talking about class and economics, because so many of them come from backgrounds where that lies in the shadows, right? And so their families have been the ones that also have helped clean places and cook places and all of these other things. So it's really, the school has been set to really kind of adjust over time to whatever the kind of generation is in the moment. It makes it really hard to know what's going to happen next, but that's kind of also partially what's really exciting about it, and is part of what really is another part of the ethos on campus, right? It is about them coming to this space and not necessarily just like recreating the things that they do at home. They don't need to be in Maine to do that. They don't need to be around all of these people from all over the world to just kind of keep doing the things that they're doing. And this idea of being together and being in this site and being protected allows that kind of exchange between them and the exchange between us, so that things begin to open for them in different ways that they never even considered coming in.
In all fairness, I will say that Cummings was an extremely fastidious man. And so he just didn't feel that artists were going to clean up after themselves.
They don't necessarily.
He was like, I'm not going to put up with a messy campus. It was already hard enough. I mean, people were painting in open studios with their ankle deep in mud sometimes, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was not the campus that it is today. But still, he part of it was that he did not want to leave it up to them, yeah.
It's true, but kind of, yeah, I think there's a lot of cleaning up that's happening and reminding of cleaning up. But again, it's also, we talk a lot about understanding that our own space is only our own space in as much that it's not actually taking away from somebody else also, right? So when we tell you nicely, remind them to clean up, which is that it's impacting others, and so that they need to think about the whole as much as they think about themselves. Maybe not so art related, but
I think the point being that they do have this time, and that they also are. And the other thing is that the hierarchy, the whole situation of hierarchies, I think, is a really interesting one at Skowhegan, because I have a hell of a time in this book, because sometimes they're called students, sometimes they're called participants, sometimes it's called a school, sometimes it's sort of a residency, and it gets to be very nebulous. How these terms are used. And the founders really wanted it to be that students would, I mean, they were their age, except for Vapor. They were the same age as these guys that were coming in, a lot of them. And they really wanted it to be that you were working alongside artists, that you would see, say, so-and-so working in a studio, and you would get an idea of what it meant to be working in a studio all day. You know, there were critiques. They did things for the first time that were, you know, pretty much, that were not done anywhere else. Critiques. They had all-day Saturday critiques. That was a new thing. That was not something, it's everywhere now, but it wasn't then. Visiting artists. The school really was run so that there would be visiting artists every single week, so that there was this constantly rotating set of viewpoints. So that's sort of this idea you're talking about with flexibility. It just meant that it was a kind of moving situation all the time, yeah. Which is, you know, and there was resistance to that at times, but yeah, I think that has managed to survive that.
It has managed to survive, and it does, and, you know, it is really complicated. So, you know, if you have 65 participants and then you have 5 resident faculty and you have 6 visiting faculty every year, brand new, it is both like a very thrilling experience, but also a very exhausting experience, because it is, and a completely unpredictable experience, right? Because you have to kind of rebuild, recoach, not bring everything from the previous year and put it on the next group. And, you know, I mean, it's 350 acres. Everybody wants to leave something behind as a monument to themselves and their own experience. So then you also have to put everything back to neutral and make it all look as if they were the first group that ever entered into that space, so that they can start to imagine what they might be there.
And the challenges of every year having rotating faculty. You know, it's not the same faculty every year.
No,
they change.
Everybody is brand new, except for a core group of staff.
So that's kind of incredible, too. That's something I don't have to deal with in running my program at Purchase. I know who's going to be there every year, you know.
Well, the good news is if somebody is not our favorite, it's done in 9 weeks. Just got to get to August.
It's late.
Should we take some questions? Oh, it did go fast. We didn't actually get into even as much as we'd hoped, but we...
Not even a fraction.
Would love to take some questions, if you have them, about anything. Oh, I think you should use the mic, if you don't mind.
I'm just going to ask people to use the mic, because this is being recorded, and we want to capture your questions. So, if you don't mind. Thank you.
Well, first, thank you for just a wonderful kind of exploration of Skowhegan and putting it so well in the historic moment when it started. And I couldn't help it when you said you're traumatized, like who isn't, right? We're all traumatized. And I don't think I fully realized that at the time Skowhegan started, we were all traumatized. They were traumatized by racism, by war, by homophobia, and so on.
The atomic bomb.
The atomic bomb, right, uncertainty about the future. So now, and you also mentioned it was a place of refuge. Now, refuge is a place where you can somehow be protected from trauma, but it's also a place where you can recover. And I'm wondering if the theme of recovery emerged either in the work that was being done, the conversations, and whether that's something you found in the wonderful story you explored.
Oh, absolutely. There was also a lot of drinking. And we laugh, but actually it was a serious issue. Sidney Simon's then wife talks about how people came and really there was a lot of drinking after the war. And to the point where she thought it was very damaging to her family in the end. But recovery, yes, but also I don't think it was so simple as, I think it was very palliative, what they went through there. The green, they talk about the green. Sarah mentioned the green. Joan Lewison talks about the green and how restorative that was. And I think for Ashley Bryan, it was absolutely essential. That painting that's in the show, he did at Skowhegan, and he did a series of 4 paintings that were abstract, of nature. Nature was just hugely, hugely healing I think, to those people who came.
I think also, like, kind of in more contemporary times, recovery, I think, is it's a long process, but I think both not in the drinking or the addiction sense, but just in the trauma sense, right? So I think a lot of people find that kind of actual breach from home to be kind of the catalyst for thinking about all of the stuff that you actually have just left behind, right? So in a lot of ways, the refuge and the recovery for artists of color, for queer artists, it's being in a space with people that are actually like you for the first time, and that's part of the recovery. For others, it's kind of pulling themselves out of a systematic situation that they had previously, but it happens with their humanity, and then it also happens with the work. It's kind of all of one big fabric.
Full disclosure, I'm with the Ashley Bryan Center, so I have a little bit of inside information, but I'd be interested to know about the application process at the outset, because Ashley, in a letter of May 2nd, 1946, writes about how it was through Cooper Union, where he attended, that he got the opportunity to go to Skowhegan on a full float.
That's right. So what happened was they identified a series of schools, I can't remember how many it was in the beginning, where they were going to make sure that the school selected somebody to send. And that went on for quite a long time. It changed over time so that, eventually, I think today schools apply. There is a sort of a matching situation, but it's thrown into a whole pool of slides. But in the beginning, that wasn't the case. They would ask schools to send somebody. And Cooper Union was one of their associated schools, so was Howard, as I mentioned. So that was really important. And in fact, Reed Kay, who's still living and who I interviewed and who taught the materials classes in the 50s, throughout the 50s, called it the genius of the place. He said the fact that they made those associations really across the country early on meant that they were getting people who were coming, and then those people would go back and they'd say, hey, there's this really cool place, you should send somebody for next year, and that's how it happened. But there also were people who just applied. They advertised in magazines, and people did just apply right from the start.
Well, when I think Ashley saw what the cost was for the summer, he said it must be a place for rich dilettantes.
Well, that's exactly what they were trying to avoid.
Right.
And were horrified by, actually, the guys who were running the school. And so they were intent on getting serious artists. Yeah. And so for them, the scholarship program was extremely important from the start. It's one of the reasons Skowhegan started out strong and stayed strong. Yeah.
And just on a bibulous note, I had a lovely conversation with Sidney Hurwitz last month, who paired with Ashley in 56. And Sidney told me that the cook would pack their picnic lunch to take over to the meeting house, but she was a teetotaler, so that Sidney and Ashley had to pack their own bottle of wine for their picnic lunch.
That's
so
right. Yeah.
But they got their work done. Thank you very much.
Yes, it sounds like Skowhegan was quite the utopia. And I wondered if there were any models that they followed, Black Mountain College or anything else that inspired the creation of this place.
Yeah, so I'll tell you what the main influence was. It's very fascinating. Now, certainly Cummings knew Ogunquit. He was friends with Laurent. He was, he knew these places. But the immediate model was actually Lakewood Theater. So Lakewood was a summer, is still, but at the time was the most important summer stock theater in the country, and it was on Lake Wasseronset. And the Cummingses were very involved in the administration of that school. And Cummings himself, as a boy, grew up in it. And what he loved was that the young actors would come, and they would be working alongside the more experienced actors. The writers, the directors, the very, very famous people. I mean, Humphrey Bogart was there. Vincent Price was a really close friend of his. I mean, he painted Catherine Cornell when she was there. I mean, it was a huge list of people. That was the immediate, not so much a utopia as a way for professional and non-professional people to intermingle and then. Exactly, yeah.
I would also, we specifically talk about it not being a utopia when we're in session, right? Because it is not realistic. I think we have to manage kind of the realism that when you have 65 people from all over the world that just like land in Maine for 9 weeks, never having known each other, that it's really important for them to kind of be realistic about how challenging it's going to be, and it's intentional how challenging.
I'm sure that now it's not billed as a utopia, but it seems like that the original inspiration of creation was almost a dream, you know, such a place of openness and acceptance. So thank you so much.
Hi, Kathy.
Hi, Kathy.
Thanks so much, Sarah and Faye. My question is about the school part of Skowhegan School. Can you foresee in the future that being dropped and that and that Skowhegan would be a residency, and that there would be a difference in the experience of the people there? But I noticed you used the word faculty, but then you said mentor. I noticed in some of these slides that there are classes being taught, which I think is going away.
No, it's long gone.
Fresco's the only
Long gone.
instructional.
So, can you foresee that it's going to lean more towards being a residency?
So I think, as Faye alluded to, it sometimes goes in and out of students and participants and faculty and resident artists. And Suzanne McClelland is resident faculty this summer, and the last time she was resident faculty in 1999, she was called resident artist. And so I think that its shape as a school or its shape as a residency really varies with whomever is the director. So for me, it's really important that it runs as a school, even though we don't really teach anything, you know? And that kind of allows for a quality of interaction. It allows for kind of a structure for them to think about what they might do there. I mean, you know, our oldest participant this summer is 55, right? And he's been out of school for a very long time, but we can still kind of be present in space together and in conversation with each other with the ultimate goal of kind of learning and growing. I think other directors in the past have run it more as a residency program, and that's also totally fine. It seems to at least have been built into the structure where there is a little movement in how it gets enacted each summer.
I mean, they've never been, I mean, there were times when there were teenagers coming, you know, late teenagers, but, you know, mostly when students arrive at the school, they're pretty advanced. I mean, they're already doing what they're doing, you know, and classes were over by, oh gosh.
60s, right?
It was the 60s. They were no longer really teaching it. They would have figure drawing classes. They would have figure drawing sessions. But in the beginning, there really were classes. And fresco is a whole other story that is a very fascinating one at Skowhegan. That's been taught from the start. But it's like, and also, what is a school? I mean, this is more your area. It's just sort of more philosophically what constitutes learning and instruction, if you want to call it that. And I still feel like it's a school.
Again, I think that's because you know it most like closely during my time, but I don't know that Tom Finkel-Pearl, I don't think was necessarily interested in it acting as a school in the way that I'm interested in acting as a school. So I think
that's true.
It kind of moves over time, you know. But, you know, the way that we think about learning also, right? So we have this amazing community of staff members that were all also participants at one time. So they understand kind of the trajectory of the generosity, but they are also there to kind of help in the learning process. So some of the most beautiful moments on campus are like when someone who's like a 40-year-old figurative painter learns how to make a video from the 21-year-old performance artist, and those two actually start to have an exchange, and the staff kind of serve as like the technical support to kind of help that process of learning.
And that's been going on for decades.
That's
really
been going
is.
on for
That
decades.
really is. Yeah, and also I don't see residencies as being places where there are formal where there are critiques like there are at Skowhegan. I mean, the critiques. I know that the critiques
They're all different, right?
Yeah.
There's something like 1,000 different kinds of residencies in this country, and Skowhegan is maybe a kind of residency and also a kind of school. And they all do different things, right? And that's all part of what they put out into the world. Some of them offer just private time and space where you go and you are working, like McDowell is kind of the most well-known. You have your studio, you're not expected to interact with anyone. They bring you your lunch at your studio so you don't even have to interrupt your day. And that's like a really valuable experience for people at certain points in their process and practice and career trajectory. But again, like the way that Skowhegan is intended to be for emerging artists, the idea is that there's still some spaciousness and energy around what can still happen with the work that they're making in this way, that having others around is really important.
And I mean, I'm asking you, it's still true that they're mainly people who have just finished their degrees. No?
I mean,
Okay.
that's also been an important part of my time.
Yeah.
It is to kind of back out of it being like a post-MFA finishing school.
I see.
A little bit, right? So now it's actually people at all stages. We've had people that haven't gone to high school. We've had people that have PhDs in other fields. We have this year a 55-year-old. His previous job was like in landscaping, not even landscape architecture. And then, people that are coming from the Dominican Republic. Everybody's got a very different specific experience with their practice and a different kind of longevity with their practice, but they have all determined that they want to be in this kind of environment with the hopes that they can kind of continue to invest and grow in different ways. So that's the crux of the school, I think, I guess. It's not, we still have these scholarship kind of matching relationships, but it's not in the same way where it was like, all right, we're going to take X amount of kids from Cooper and X amount of kids from RISD, and whatever. Sorry.
My question is about the role of women, founded by 4 men, but looking at the photographs both early and all the way through, seems like women have played a prominent role, but I haven't heard too much about women so far.
That's a huge question and a good one. In fact, the first year, Henry Varnampour invited his daughter Anne to come lecture, and she joined the faculty the next year, and as far as I'm concerned, is one of the founders. I think she is the 4th founder, not Charles Cutler, who was only there for 2 years and really did nothing.
We could call them the 5th.
Yeah,
founder.
There's not. I make a big deal about this in the book. She was extremely involved, and it's the typical situation throughout Skowhegan's history that, yes, I mean, it was like a lot of women were the students. Almost no women were on the faculty for many decades, until 1979, I want to say, when they had their first all-female faculty, which included Lois Dodd. And that was the first time, and throughout the 70s before that, it was horrifying. There were like very few women who were on the faculty. So it's changed tremendously, but it was really rough for women in the beginning.
Also, Faye had basically, you've discovered the fact that there were all of these other people that were supporting the school in really critical ways, including the wives of the founders, and in Bill Cummings' case, the sisters of the founder, that don't kind of get the credit that they're due for both administering the school, funding the school, giving space in the creation of the school, but they actually played hugely critical roles.
I also wonder a little, because so many of those, all the Cummings sisters, there were 5 Cummings kids, and 3 of them were women. 2 of those women had a significant experience with the school. And Millie, who was Bill's wife, was also, they were extremely well educated, and a lot of them went to Bennington. And I actually think, you know, something I wish I could have gotten more into is to look at sort of the pedagogical philosophy of Bennington, which was so progressive, and see if that filtered in certain ways into the pedagogy at Skowhegan. I think that's an excellent question, and it is in the book, but we didn't get to it much today, yeah.
Well, I think on that note, Faye, with this recognition that while so much has been addressed today, that there remains so much more for us to discover is perfect. And to me, it's a reminder of the extraordinarily rich history of this region in terms of the production of art, and the degree to which it is continuing to be so vibrant, to raise so many fascinating questions, and to produce such great art. Faye and Sarah, thank you so much for your wonderful remarks, for this really enlightening conversation. Thank you to everybody who's joined us for your wonderful questions, for participating. And I think somewhat in the spirit of Skowhegan, we now want to invite everybody to join us for a gathering outdoors where we can continue the conversation. There's an opportunity to participate in some art-making activities, as well as an opportunity to see the exhibition. The museum will be open to the public tonight until 7 p.m. Thank you all for being with us to launch At First Light. Thank you, Sarah and Faye.
Thank you, and thank you for the questions. The questions were great.
Good question.
Yeah.